Seriously, don't buy a car. I think it's a liability. I think it's a waste of money.
Ever dreamed of owning a car in Singapore? How much will you need to earn? Joining us today is Julian Kho, editor and general manager of Sgcarmart, someone who has extensive experience in the automotive industry. Hi Julian, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yourself?
I'm great. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Okay, so let's begin.
Yeah.
Julian, my first question is, why is owning a car in Singapore so much more expensive compared to other countries?
I think there's several reasons for that. The first one is, of course, COE. The certificate of entitlement today is ranging between $100,000 to $120,000. There is still additional registration taxes. We call it ARF. We also have the VES, so it depends on your carbon emissions and so on and so forth. So a lot of all these kinds of stuff come into play that brings up the cost of the car. So while you can buy probably a nice sports car in another country for about $45,000, it'll cost you about $250,000, all added in.
Then it goes without saying, buying a car in Singapore can be a significant financial commitment, especially for first-time buyers due to increasing COE prices and various taxes. Now, for these first-time buyers, what advice would you offer them, particularly in the affordability aspect?
I'll tell them, don't buy a car. Seriously, don't buy a car. I think it's a liability. I think it's a waste of money. I think our public transportation is very efficient. If you actually travel enough, you'll realize that public transportation in Singapore is one of the best in the world. But if you really need a car, you know, you've got old folks at home, you've got kids, you think a car is really necessary, find something that's within your budget. Humans are greedy, you know? I mean, if I see someone driving a small compact hatchback, I want to have something bigger. You know, if I see a friend of mine driving a Mercedes C-Class, I want to buy an E-Class. Don't follow those people. Work within our budget, get something that you're really comfortable with, it'll fit the family. I think that's good enough. I mean, after all, if you think about it from a very practical point of view, a car is supposed to get you from point to point in a fuss-free manner.
So you brought it up. Alternative transportation options are gaining popularity in Singapore, right? And there is a growing emphasis on sustainability. What's your take then on the future of car ownership in Singapore, and what are the implications for the automotive industry?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think moving forward, people will start driving more electrified vehicles. When the government came up with some regulation that they'll stop all internal combustion engine cars by 2040. So I would assume a lot of cars will either be hybrid, plug-in hybrids, or full electric cars. So moving forward, I think we'll see more of those. I believe there will always be a niche market of buyers, or collectors rather, who would keep all these old cars, all the internal combustion engine cars, which is great. You know, I mean, if I could afford, I think I'll be one of them as well. But I reckon current generation, or maybe the generation after me, they would probably not drive anymore. I mean, it's so convenient. If I wanna go somewhere, I can just whoop up my phone, book Grab, and it'll come right to my doorstep, right? I mean, it's very convenient. It's getting a little expensive if you ask me, but it's still cheaper than owning a car. So I think lesser people will actually be interested in buying a car. In Singapore, I think it's a status symbol. Buying a car, you know, means you are slightly more well-to-do. I don't think that's really necessary. With the efficiency of our public transportation, I think it's perfectly fine.
Okay, so for those that do want to buy a car, maintenance and servicing costs are also an important consideration for car owners.
Of course.
Can you suggest ways to ensure optimal performance and longevity while reducing these expenses?
Depending on the cars that you buy, of course. I mean, if you're a buyer of a sports car, I don't think you'll really care so much about fuel consumption, for instance. But if you're just a regular buyer like you and me, get a hybrid car. It's fuel efficient, it's got that boost if you want. It might be boring, but it gets the job done. I think more importantly, I actually found a trustworthy mechanic. After a couple of months of finding and trial and error, you sort of find somebody you can really trust, you can really get along. Find that someone, go to him, settle everything with him. Most importantly of all is, no matter how busy you are, Make time to service your car regularly. I think that's key. A lot of people always come and say, oh, I've got this problem and I've got that problem. I'm sure you've got problems. I mean, a car is a machine. There's like thousands of mechanical parts made together, If a small part of the car is wrecked and you don't rectify it immediately or as soon as you can, it's just going to spread like cancer to other parts of the car. And then that's going to cause a lot of big problems. So instead of solving the problem that would probably cost you $150 to $200, it becomes $500, $600, $800 because this one just caused something else to leak and it caused something else to spoil. So service your car regularly. If there's a problem, rectify it immediately. That gives you longevity in owning a car in Singapore at least.
Right, so do your due diligence, service, inspect your car regularly. Okay, financing a car can be complex.
Yes.
When exploring financing options, what should potential car owners consider?
Go shopping. Keep your options open. I mean, there are many financial institutions, banks that you can research on. What are the interest rates? Are there any early repayment penalties? What are the penalties like? It's difficult, right? Because friends will always come to you and say, hey, you should go to this bank or you should go to that bank. I've had good experience with them. But just because they've had good experience does not mean that you will have a positive one as well. So it really depends. So do your research, find someone or find a bank or find an institution that you're comfortable with. The amount that you loan plays a really, really huge part. If you can pay 70% down payment of the car, the cost of the car, which is a lot by the way, but if you can afford to pay 70%, your loan is only 30%, and that sort of gives you lesser interest fee as well. So a couple of things to think about, but definitely the loan amount to me is key.
Singapore is a very small island.
Yep.
In conclusion, is it really worth it owning a car here?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, I've done some serious calculations, and this calculation was done years ago, right? So it might not even be exactly accurate. Now would be much higher, I would assume. But if you don't spend anything more than $70 on public transport a day, owning a car is just not worth it anymore. But there are people who spend that much. I mean, imagine if you're a salesman, you got to run from point to point. I mean, then yeah, it's probably worth getting a car. But for regular Joes like you and me, it's just not worth it. So here's a really fun fact, right, if I may. Got this friend of mine, wife just gave birth, really happy, blah, blah, blah. And he came to me and said, hey, I want to get a car. Do you think, what car should I get? And he has never owned a car before in his life. And I told him, I said, you got to think about this really, really carefully. It's all about adapting, no? If you have never driven a car before and you've got a kid, why would you need a car? Because if you have a car, what's going to happen is you're going to go from point A to point B to point C and then back home. But if you don't have a car, you're just going to go point A, point B and back home. Point C can be done tomorrow or next week or whatever. So we will just adapt to our lifestyle, right? I mean, if you have a car, of course it's going to be easier. I mean, you can't discount the fact that owning a car gives you convenience. Convenience cannot be discounted at all. But if you think about it from a really, really logical financial point of view, wouldn't you want to save as much as possible for the kid?
Absolutely.
Right? Take a regular taxi. It's still going to cost you cheaper. It's still going to be easier for you, I mean, financially at least. But of course, that's just me being really cheap and logical, as logical as I can be. But I mean, of course, if your pocket is deep enough, go ahead, buy a car.
But financially speaking, to speak on what you said, I think it's all about creating or organizing your priorities.
But people don't realize, people would probably think that my priority is to give convenience and comfort for my family, which I completely understand. But if I have to weigh comfort versus financial gains, I think I'll probably go for financial gains, but that's just me.
Okay. Again, it depends on the individual.
Yeah,
okay.
Pretty much.
Okay. Thank you so much for chatting with me,
Thank
Julian.
you. Thank
Really
you very much for having me, man.
We'll do this again sometime.
Yes, definitely.
Great. It's always a good idea to evaluate your personal finances, including long-term goals, when determining your car budget. A thorough consideration will help determine the next steps. Stay tuned for our next episode, which will feature more insights and analysis. I'm Roshan Gidwani, and you've been watching Teatime Tuesday. Please like and subscribe for more. See you again.